Do you believe in miracles? That's one of the most famous lines from a sports announcer in United States history. Matter of fact, they've even made a movie, Miracle on Ice. That line, do you believe in miracles? When a group of college amateurs beat the Russian professional team in the Winter Olympics. So, do you believe in miracles? Great line. But I'm not talking about a shocking and surprising upset on the ice. Yeah, I want to take that line and ask the question when it comes to the Bible, do you believe in miracles? Do you believe that the Bible talks about miracles? Do you believe in miracles? So let's talk about miracles. And I want to do three things. I want to talk about what they are, how we define a miracle. I want to talk about where they occur. And I want to talk about how we understand miracles and in the modern world. So what is a miracle? Well, let's make a clear distinction. Providence is what God does all the time. So a rock slide missed me. That's not a miracle. That was God's providence that I was at this point instead of at that point. Okay? Rocks slide. Sometimes they hit objects and sometimes they don't. So watching how all that's why the Bible says God works all things together for good, for the good, for his glory, to them that love the Lord and are the called according to his purpose. So that's God's normal way of operating. A miracle, on the other hand, is something that falls outside the realm of the established way that the world works. So here's what's interesting. God is not the great clockmaker that made the universe and then lets it run on its own and occasionally breaks in as a miracle. That's not the idea. But the Bible tells us not that God does everything, but he upholds everything. And upholds is an important word because what that means is that God established the way it's going to work. And God upholds it so that it continues to work that way on a regular basis. So God established gravity. God upholds the laws of gravity that he established at the beginning of creation. God upholds the speed of light, though it is debatable as to exactly how constant that is, but that's a whole other subject about Einsteinian quantum mechanics and quantum theory. We don't get all that. But God, upholds that a body in motion tends to remain in motion until acted upon by outside force. A body at rest tends to remain at rest until acted upon by an outside force. Some of Newton's laws of inertia. God upholds that depth perception comes from having two eyes. So that gives us a depth perception. God upholds that sound moves in waves. God upholds that a certain part of the spectrum is red and a certain part is blue and a certain part is green, and that these basic colors mixed together create all the other colors of the spectrum. And so when we see that, whatever band it is, the spectrum, it's not purple one day, but then blue the next day, and then green the next day, and then yellow the next day, and then black the following day, and then white the next day, and it's not like that. In other words, that band of the spectrum is always the same color. So God upholds that consistency. So a miracle is when God sets aside, for lack of a better term, his upholding of the normal pattern and does something outside the normal way things happen. So he doesn't break the laws of physics or health or whatever it is, because we call them laws, but it's not really a law that's broken. Is God has upheld it all the way to here, but he suspends upholding it to do something, and then he goes back to upholding them again. So let's take the crossing of the Red Sea. I would call that a miracle. God parts the waters, and the ground is dry. The waters don't just part. God actually makes a wind blow all night so strong that it parts the waters. Then God keeps the waters separated. The real miracle is not as much the parting of the waters, but that the ground that's been sitting under water for decades is dry and firm and not all mushy and muddy, which is what it ought to be. And so they crossed on dry ground, Israel, and then when Pharaoh and his armies come in, the ground goes back to being mud. Now that's a miracle. That's not the way God normally That's not the way God has established the world to work normally. So miracles when it steps outside the norm. Blind people don't just suddenly start seeing. That's not the norm. That's not how God has established the world to work. People that can't walk don't just suddenly start walking. That's why they're miracles. Okay? So that's kind of what a miracle is. Now, it's interesting that in the Bible, with a handful of exceptions, all the miracles only occur in 3 places. Well, I guess we could say technically 4, if you really want to push it 5. But let's do the 3, and I'll talk about the other 2 briefly. So the 3 places are Moses and Joshua. So Moses, the plagues on Egypt and the, which are called plagues, not miracles, the parting of the Red Sea, manna in the wilderness, water from the rock. They walk around Jericho and the walls come tumbling down. I mean, there are a whole set of miracles around Moses and Joshua. Moses is the one that gives us the law. So when God's ready to institute a new era, the era of the law, we have a set of miracles. Then there are pretty much no miracles recorded, again, outside of just 1 or 2 here or there, until Elijah and Elisha at the end of 1 Kings, the beginning of 2 Kings. And now suddenly there's a whole plethora. There's more than 24 miracles between these 2 guys. Elijah is viewed as the first of the great prophets. And so now we're moving into a new era. So a new era means we have a wave of miracles to introduce this new era. So we have the law, miracles with Moses and his disciple Joshua. The prophets, Elijah and his disciple Elisha. And the Bible talks about the law and the prophets. Then when it comes time for the new era, the new covenant, or I hate to use the phrase age of grace because God's been gracious from the beginning. But anyway, the new era, the ultimate era, Jesus performs a whole boatload of miracles. Lots and lots of miracles. Jesus' disciples. So we have Moses, the law, and his disciple Joshua. Elijah, the prophets, and his disciple Elisha. Jesus, the new age, and his disciples. And even as we move towards the end of the book of Acts, the number of miracles declines dramatically. So as God institutes a new era, there is a wave of miracles. Outside of that, there really are not many miracles that are found. The Apostle Paul, in his letters to all the churches, outside of Corinth, which had all kinds of theological issues, and a dude sleeping with his dad's ex-wife, his former stepmom, all kinds of crazy stuff. Really miracles, the Apostle Paul doesn't talk about them. He just doesn't, because they were waning. So miracles really are done to introduce a new era. Now those are the 3. We could extend that to 5, because the beginning of everything, there are a whole lot of miracles. A living human being from dust, I would call that miraculous. Overnight, all the plants and animals grow to full maturity, including fruit. The Bible says that God caused them to spring up and to sprout. And so God didn't just make the trees. God just sped up the process in creation and happened very, very quickly. And so we find a couple of phrases like that in the creation account, which is one possible way of explaining a distant starlight reaching the earth so quickly. And so you could say there was some miraculous there. And then at the end of time, to introduce the millennium, there will be a false prophet who will do a bunch of miracles. But there are false miracles by a false prophet to deceive the nations. But that will introduce a new era, which will be the millennium. And so we could add those 2. But really, the 3 are Moses and the law, Elijah and the prophets, Jesus and the new era. That's where they occur. So that brings us to miracles today. The reality is most of what we would call a miracle is God at work putting things in place. And so we call that a miracle. Or we use the miracle to describe something that's normal, that God upholds all the time, but wow, it still leads us to worship and be impressed by God. For example, childbirth. I've heard a lot of women say, having a child is miraculous. Not really. People have been doing it for thousands of years. Millions of babies are born every year. It is the norm. It's the standard. God upholds that this is the way that it works, but it is still impressive. And to think that you can only be led to worship if something is a miracle is really, really, really bad theology. Just the wonder and awe of the world that God has created and the way it works leads us to worship. We don't need a miracle in order to spur us to worship. Now, miracle's cool, but that's, kind of a misplaced way of using the word miracle. In the Bible, a miracle, we get some definition to what a miracle is. One, we've already said, it's something that happens outside the norm. Number two, sometimes the word awe or wonder or wonderment or wondrous is used to describe it, meaning a miracle is something that's done that brings awe to us. It's wonder on our behalf as we see God do something so dramatic and out of the norm. So it's out of the norm. It creates wonder in us. And then the third element is that it is a sign. Miracles, for the most part, are not really done in the Bible just to be a miracle. I mean, there are some where Jesus just heals somebody. But most of the time, they're a sign. And they're a sign to point to something. So the miracles of Moses point to God's right to give the law. The miracles of the prophets point to God's authority behind their message. The miracles of Jesus point to He is the divine Son of God, the Messiah. They are a sign. And so, do I believe in miracles today? Yes. I believe they're excessively rare because they're excessively rare in the Bible. They just don't happen. Sometimes there are hundreds of years of recorded history in the Bible with no miracles of any kind that are given. And so, as we've noted, they only kind of occur in three pockets with, again, there's a few here and there, Daniel and Lion's Den, a few others, but for the most part, that's it. They occur in those three places, and they're a sign of what God is doing. And so I do believe that there are still sometimes miracles. I believe that I have actually witnessed a couple of those in my lifetime where God has done way beyond the norm. I knew a man that had cancer, and they were going to do surgery, and man, we had been praying and praying. He was witnessing. The doctor was an atheist and made fun of him for all of that. They went in and they did the scope before they were going to open him for surgery, and there was no cancer. And I mean, we saw the pictures. I saw the pictures. Cancer, no cancer. And the doctor came out. I can't believe I've never seen anything like it. And then he said, we were a bunch of us were in the waiting room. He said, "What church do y'all go to?" Like, the miracle wasn't, oh, well, just to heal this dude. But it was a sign to an unbeliever. God used that to start to work conviction in the heart of that atheist doctor who had been making fun of this man and now suddenly stands stunned because he had no explanation. We did. So I do believe in miracles, but again, I believe that they are rare and they are intended to give a sign that points to something that God is doing. So I hope this encourages you. Don't be looking all the time for miracles. Instead, open your eyes to what God is doing all the time. The one who is upholding the universe in His hands and the incredible things He does all the time. And then on those rare occasions when miracles come, celebrate and rejoice. But look, what is this pointing to? What is this a sign to? It may be to you or it may be to someone else, and an opportunity for you to share with them about the goodness of God and His Son Jesus. So God bless you. I hope you have a fantastic day, and spend this day not looking for some dramatic miracle, but looking what God is doing all the time, all around us, in His upholding of our universe and our world.